In this video, I'm gonna give you an overview of reader response theory, its types and its contributors. Reader response criticism is a school of literary theory that focuses on the reader and their experience of a literary work. Actually, with the rise of new criticism and formalism, the authenticity of the idea is being questioned. Once the text gets published, people came up with different ideas, and the critics believed that if the author has no role left, then obviously comes the role of the reader. It is even argued in Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author that states the reader is the second author, the reader is the destination, and the death of the author could be taken as the birth of the reader. Until the 1960s, new criticism reigned supreme in American universities. It is all about focusing on the text itself. We weren't supposed to think about the author and certainly not about the reader. Reader response theory originated in late 1960s when a group of critics including Stanley Fish, Wolfgang Iser and Norman Holland started asking questions about how a reader's response to a literary text actually creates that text. According to this theory, the readers are just important as the authors. The readers are active participants who create a work of literature in the process of reading. The real root of reader response theory could be traced in the year 1938 with the publication of Literature as Exploration, a work by Louis Rosenwald. It was the first work of literary criticism that set out in detail a reader response perspective. In this book, Rosenwald deals at length how the reader's response to a text is fundamental to the understanding of a literary work. She says, text is just an ink on a page until the reader comes along and gives it life. Now, let's discuss about some of the major contributors of reader response theory. The first one is Stanley Fish, who is an American critic best known for Interpretive Communities, an offshoot of reader response criticism, and his major work includes Surprised by Sin, The Reader in Paradise Lost, 1967, Literature in the Reader, Effective Stylistics, published in 1970. Is There a Text in This Class? The Authenticity of Interpretive Communities, 1980. He applied a reader response perspective to the works of John Milton's epic Paradise Lost, and he argues that we just can't understand a literary work like Milton's epic without understanding the reader's reaction to it. Then the next in line is Wolfgang Iser, a German scholar who wrote a lot about how the meaning of a literary text is not in the text itself but can be found in the interaction between the reader and the text. He coined the term implied reader, also known as ideal reader. Implied reader means a reader who is in agreement with the text. In the sense, the reader reads the text in a way the text directs him to read it. Implied reader responds to the text as per the text expects. He argues that a text would contain blanks or gaps. The text would not tell everything, and the reader must fill these gaps in order to build a meaning. According to him, these blanks are actually important as it stimulates the reader's imagination. His important work includes The Implied Reader, Patterns of Communication in Prose Fiction from Bunyan to Beckett, 1972, The Act of Reading, A Theory of Aesthetic Response, 1978. Then the next most important contributor is Norman Holland and David Bellage. They were influenced by the ideas of psychoanalyst and the theorist Sigmund Freud, and they argued that understanding literary text is all about understanding the psychology of the person who is actually reading the text. The important work of David Blyth, Subjective Criticism, in 1978, and Holland's most important work is The Nature of Literary Response, 5 Readers Reading, in 1975. In a way, traditional text-oriented schools such as formalism often think of reader response criticism as an anarchic subjectivism, allowing readers to interpret a text any way they want. So, reader response theory in a way helps to dethrone new criticism, and it paves way for a lot of literary schools that followed in 1970s and 80s like post-structuralism and new historicism. Let's see the types of reader response theory. There are 5 types of reader response theory: transactional reader response theory, affective stylistics, subjective reader response theory, psychological reader response theory, and social reader response theory. Transactional reader response theory. This theory believes that the literary text is the result of the transaction between the text and the reader. According to Rosenwald, the reader of a text does not reside exclusively within the text or within the reader. Instead, she suggested the meaning of a text occurs as a result of transaction between the reader and the written word. During this transaction, the text acts as a stimulus for the reader, who responds in a personal way as personal emotions and memories come into play during the act of reading. Then the next one is affective stylistics. The main proponent of this type is Stanley Fish. This contradicts the idea that the meaning of the text is within it. The text is examined closely, often line by line or even word by word, in order to understand how stylistics affects the reader in the process of reading. Then the next one is subjective reader response theory. The main proponent is David Blyth. According to him, the response of the reader is not determined or controlled by the text. Reading is wholly a subjective process, determined by the distinctive personality of the individual reader. The act of reading creates a conceptual symbolic word. In other words, reading is symbolization or creation of meaning. Then the next one, psychological reader response theory by Norman Holland. A reader is not independent in his own motive towards reading a text. Interpretations and responses made by a reader expresses his own psychology. Then the last one, social reader response theory, also known as reception theory. It is interested in how a literary work is received over time. In fact, the status of a literary work is dependent on the reader's reception of the work. Thank you.